Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. This week, bringing you a special American Probation and Parole Association edition. As the voice of the community corrections industry, APPA serves as the field's leading professional membership association. In addition to their U.S. members, the American Probation and Parole Association is supported by international members who are actively involved in strengthening community corrections work in their own countries. APPA's International Relations Committee aims to connect community corrections professionals around the world to inspire and share insights from their unique experiences and best practices. Welcome to this special APPA episode of The Criminologist. And now, welcome your host, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 170 of The Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. This week, bringing you yet another special hybrid edition as we are teaming up with our good friends at the American Probation and Parole Association, in particular, their International Relations Committee. We have a very special interview to share with you this week as we are joined by a Ukrainian probation officer. She is joining us all the way from her home in Kiev. We hope to weave in more and more of these special edition episodes in the future, so stay tuned in particular for those. Now, for those of you who may not be aware of the American Probation and Parole Association, allow me to bring you some brief contextual info before I share my conversation with this week's very special guest. The American Probation and Parole Association really is the voice of the community corrections industry. APPA serves as the field's leading professional membership association. Their work is supported by thousands of passionate members throughout the United States, as well as other countries actively involved in strengthening their community corrections network. Everything APPA does is aimed at reducing recidivism to keep our communities safe. And that means strengthening the role of the community corrections industry. As noted, the Criminologist podcast works closely with the American Probation and Parole Association, and our goal is to expand the reach and influence of this great organization beyond our shores and highlight the great work being done by some of our international partners. And one of those partners is my next guest, Margarita Potseluiko, who works in Kiev, Ukraine for their Ministry of Justice, specifically their Center of Probation. Now, as you are all about to discover, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Margarita opted to remain in the capital city and continue the work she does against the backdrop of some rather horrific conditions. Please enjoy my conversation with Margarita Potseluiko, and I will see you all on the other side. Why don't we start off the interview by you telling us just a little bit about yourself and your background, both educationally and professionally, that got you to this point of your journey in life.
Thank you so much, dear Joseph. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for your invitation. This is the long-awaited event, and it's a great honor for me, really. This is so interesting program. Sometimes I listen to your guests, and it's really useful source of information, especially for people who are interested in the sphere of the criminal justice. So let me introduce myself. My name is Margarita. I'm from Ukraine. Now I live and work in Kiev. I have the first pedagogical education, and the second, I graduated from the National Academy of Public Administration under the President of Ukraine and obtained a master's degree. I have experience working in state authorities. I worked in the regional state administration in the Department of International Relations. And now, for more than 2 years, I have been working in the public institution Center of Probation under the Ministry of Justice of Ukraine, as the chief specialist in the International Cooperation Unit.
Fantastic. Now, Margarita, thank you, first of all, for listening to the podcast and being a fan of the show. I really appreciate that. And you hit the nail on the head. That's really what we try to do here, is spread the message around the world about common themes in probation and parole. Truth be told, normally I just ask people more about their systems, but I know because you're in Ukraine, we're going to contextualize this, obviously. Let's talk about two things. First, the development of probation in Ukraine, and then also the challenges of war going on. Can you maybe just give us an overview of talk about first the development of Ukraine, and then again the impacts of the war going on now?
That's quite difficult question. I mean, according to these conditions we are living and working now. In Ukraine, the national probation system is a part of the State Criminal Enforcement Service and functions within the structure of the Ministry of Justice of Ukraine as a public institution center of probation. We have 573 probation units, and these probation units function in all administrative territorial units of the country, of course, where there are courts. Functions and tasks of probation performed by more than 3,000 employees, of whom 76% of women. The legislation defines 3 types of probation according to its functions: pretrial, supervisory, and penitentiary. And most probation clients, of course, focus on the supervised probation phase. And last year, more than 120,000 clients passed through probation. If we talk about the war, it became a challenge for all Ukrainians and, of course, influenced the organization of probation work. But probation hasn't stopped the execution of the sentences. But, of course, we have we also suffers losses. Fortunately, we have no personnel losses. We have a number of destroyed probation office premises. I guess 12% of workplaces already lost. Currently, the war is ongoing, and it's absolutely impossible to predict possible losses. However, 14% of our probation officers, 5% of our staff, and 13% of our probation clients currently remain in cities under temporary enemy occupation. But in order to save their lives, the lives of their relatives, some of our workers and probation clients, they were forced to move to other regions of our country. And accordingly, we started working, taking into account the circumstances, looking for a new algorithm for executing sentences, ensuring security, and supporting communication. And what can I add? The work of probation in the conditions of war forced us to look at the issue of probation through the prism of challenges. Some of these challenges are not new, but in the conditions of war, they have become very relevant. It's safety of staff and clients of probation. It's protection of personal data and preservation of material values. It's stable communication between staff and clients. Also, mobility of technical means for personnel work. And of course, it's restoring the functionality of probation, I mean, some workplaces. But we have many difficult challenges which have arisen. But the desire to preserve achievements and develop further has become much stronger.
Margarita, when most people turn on the news, unfortunately, they think of Ukraine and the Russian invasion. Can you speak to the challenges of war and specifically the challenges of continuing to operate a newly developed, relatively speaking, probation system against the backdrop of that type of a global conflict, rather?
War is the challenges of war. Challenges of war are challenges of work organizations. And the challenges of war showed that today it's necessary to pay more attention to mobility. And that is now included in normative acts that regulate the probation algorithm, which are issues and related to the possibility of communication through telecommunication means of communications. And this is in safe situation. This is the only way to support communication, at least support communication with the client during these threatening situations.
So, Margarita, for example, when you speak about the challenges of war, I look at this through my perspective and others around the world who were dealing with the COVID pandemic and how that affected our ability to do our jobs with probation, our ability to supervise our clients. I'm just trying to imagine what that experience is like for the probation officer and the clients having to adapt to this new reality of still doing the job, still being supervised, but against the backdrop of war. That is just really hard for me to imagine what that challenge must be like.
Yes, we continue our work. The probation officers continue to perform their task, but now we realize new reality. We live in new reality, and it calls war. But still, we continue function as a complex institution.
So, Margarita, as I mentioned, I've noticed around the world, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, the probation systems are still somewhat in their infancy compared to, for example, here in America. How has probation in Ukraine evolved over the years, in your opinion?
Since our country has decided on European integration, our probation has developed from the very beginning when the law on probation appeared, and the development is in accordance with the European and international standards. We have assessment tools, we have probation programs, we have register of convicts and prisoners that has been created. Our probation has been accepted into the Confederation of European Probation, which confirms the European course. Since the introduction of probation in Ukraine, there has been a trend of increasing the number of convicts serving sentences without deprivation of liberty. And currently, the ratio of those serving sentences on probation to those detained in prison is 2 to 1. This is a real indicator of the effectiveness of probation. And I can add that the main goal is to reveal the prisons and use isolation from society as a last resort.
I love, for example, when you talk about the use of assessments. And again, I've talked about how I just love seeing these common themes throughout the world. And of course, we know within the risk needs responsivity framework, it's all about assessment. And I'm tickled that you are in touch with the Confederation of European Probation. That's a great agency over there, and it's great that you've sort of become part of that CEP family. Margarita, could you perhaps describe some of the key challenges and obstacles that you're facing in the development of your probation systems?
Yes, of course. But I'd like to say We consider ourselves lucky because some of the probations of developed countries have been developing for more than 100 years. But partners from these countries have developed us overcome this path much faster and take only what is necessary without repeating these mistakes. But nevertheless, the probation exists. And probation was created by the state to ensure the safety of society. And we cannot work without constant communication with society, without taking into account public opinion. And one of the problems that is very difficult to prove to society, why criminals shouldn't be imprisoned. I guess that is a general problem that exists all over the world.
Margarita, we have the same problem over here with our stakeholders. Why people should not be in prison, exactly.
Then the second one is the pretrial reports that we prepare for the court. Because for judges who are interested in justice, this information is simply necessary, and they say that they need it very much because it's not information about the crime or criminal proceedings or the circumstances. It's information about the person who allows to make a more effective, more individualized decision on punishment. And we have as we have in law, necessary for correction. And on one hand, sometimes this information is misused. Sometimes cases in which the court doesn't want to take responsibility and tries to position probation as a service that requires imprisonment or not imprisonment. There are such attempts to abuse the very fact of probation's participation in the judicial process. The third problem that we face, and the solution of which we now expect, is punishment in the form of community service. This is the most transparent type of alternative punishment for the community, because these people work for free in the eyes of the community and for its benefit. And we think that community is most involved in this. The community most sees and perceive this type of punishment. In my country, according to our criminal law, community service had slightly more punitive features. It's very difficult in the format that we have in the law to convince the community that public works, community service are being done for the benefit of the community, which is why local authorities approve mainly like street cleaning, and that's all. Although the community has many more needs that could be solved with this free labor, and it would be visible for the community, more relevant issues for the community, and of course it would be better perceived by the community. For example, just a small example, the arrangement of bomb shelters today. If our clients worked on the arrangement of these bomb shelters, then everyone would know about it, because the bomb shelters are now in front of everyone's eyes, and everyone would know that there are community service, people who didn't go to prison, but they take care of the safety of the community in every sense.
And what about the impact the war has had on the work of the probation officers themselves, as far as their caseloads, conducting risk assessments, and the actual supervision of their clients?
We can talk about the fact that some of the probation officers remain in the occupied territory to this day, and we unfortunately don't know anything about them at all. There are 6 of them. And the rest of the workers who who couldn't leave due to some life circumstances. We know that they are there, but of course they cannot do anything. Other probation officers, there are about 150 people, have been transferred to another safe regions on the basis of other probation units. And they continue to carry out their activities with clients' cases through the registers. And they can perform some procedural issues, communicate with clients, and in general, our minimum concept is what we said. What did the war teach us? So it's very important to at least keep in touch, to be in contact with these clients. I guess procedures are secondary, but maintaining contact is a confirmation that we are working, that we are moving somewhere, and these conditions have even shown clients' trust in probation officers, because even from the occupation, sometimes they call and worry that they are not considered evasive, or they are not declared wanted.
Yes, we have a term here in the United States that you're referring to when we say the client has lost touch or that they've absconded from supervision. So I can empathize with those clients who are trying to reach out to their probation officer saying, I've not absconded, I've not escaped, I'm still in touch here. I can't imagine, Margarita, when you were talking about the occupied territory and those 6 probation officers that you've lost touch, what a tragic and surreal experience that must be for the Ukraine probation officer community over there.
Yeah, it's difficult, and unfortunately we couldn't help them. And actually, when we have some time for doing or for moving to another region, that was their choice. Maybe due to some life circumstances, they couldn't leave their native cities, villages, because there was their children, grandparents, or some relatives, and that was their choice to stay there.
Yeah, just a very difficult situation, obviously. Are there any specific initiatives or programs implemented to support probation service in those conflict areas that we were just sort of referencing?
It's important to say that, of course, there are some international organizations and our internal organization that are more concerned with issues related to the detention of convicts in places of deprivation of liberty, who cannot move freely and who, in the event of evacuation, cannot do this on their own. And the bottom line is that more programs and initiatives were and are related to people who cannot make decisions on their own. Our units, our probation units, and our clients independently solve the issue of relocation, evacuation, etc. Evacuations were carried out as much as possible in conflict zones with the framework of local government programs. But there are these questions are very complex. But if we talk about how the occupation takes place, when people return, then with the assistance of local self-government bodies, offices are rebuilt. And when there was a threat of occupation, there was absolutely no time to create any programs. So the evacuation and exit from the conflict zone took place as much as possible by all available forces and means. It was impossible to do this centrally. As much as anyone could use in their own transport, who could, because there were people who, for some objective reasons, cannot leave the occupied territories. And if I talk about the restoration of territories, then of course there are some statewide programs managed by military civilian administrations. And this is not support for probation service, but actually it's ensuring the safety of the activities of state bodies and institutions in the occupied territories. And there are currently no international special programs to support the probation service.
Here in the United States and other countries, of course, we like to strike that balance between the helper role of the probation officer with the legitimate safety considerations that most probation officers have to deal with when they're dealing with this criminal population, if you will. Could you talk about any strategies put in place to address safety and security concerns of probation officers who are operating in regions affected by the war? Again, a totally different dynamic that you're dealing with when you think of probation officer safety in Ukraine versus, for example, here in the United States.
I can say that no special programs, but of course there are state programs for the restoration of the occupied territories, and probation is considered in the network of state authorities whose activities are being restored, including law enforcement like prosecutor's office, police, courts, and some others. And first of all, there should be a building that is suitable for use. Of course, we have general safety measures. For example, the Sumy region is constantly imposed to shelling from across the border on a daily basis. So these are already general security strategies. Includes sheltering actions during air raids. Probation premises cannot function in the area where there is a risk of shelling or other things. And if we contact probation clients who live in such territories, then only by means of telecommunications, because we don't have mobile means of transportation, something like that.
Again, I'm just really appreciative and have so much empathy for what you and the probation community are going through over there. I simply can't relate to this. The closest I guess we could come, many of us, is, say, for example, having to navigate the struggles of a natural disaster if there's a tornado or an earthquake, but not navigating the struggles of an ongoing war conflict. It's just surreal to me, Margarita, what you're going through. And again, I have nothing but empathy and applause for everything that you and the Ukraine probation community are doing over there. You touched on this a little bit when you talked about some collaboration with law enforcement, for example, but to that end, I'm wondering, has the war had an effect on the cooperation and the collaboration between probation and those usual stakeholders that probation officers deal with, such as law enforcement or service providers or NGOs or the usual collaborators that you normally work with in probation?
Yes, we cooperate with law enforcement agencies and cooperating now. And the only thing that has been added to the law enforcement agencies is ensuring the security of the state from the point of view of countering anti-state activities. Countering crimes against the foundations of national security, which requires active exchange of information and communication with colleagues. And we have to communicate with colleagues in this matter, and both regarding employees and clients who remain in the occupied territory. This is on one hand. One side of the issue. We cooperate with the law enforcement agencies. The war affected cooperation with non-governmental and state organizations. Of course, if there are agreements in the form of memorandum with state and public organizations on providing assistance in solving issues of organizing probationary work with clients, for example, social services, assistance, volunteering. then the volume of all these resources has decreased a little, because now everything is aimed at ensuring the safety of the community, or helping the victims, etc. Nevertheless, we still have about 1,000 volunteers working with us. They work with our clients equally, and the opportunities have decreased a little, because volunteer opportunities are now directed to the armed forces of Ukraine and people in the affected regions for protection against threat and dangers. Moreover, our clients also become volunteers. But in any case, cooperation didn't stop. Cooperation continues and it became more difficult, but she didn't stop.
I talked about how in probation we learn from the hand we're dealt, sort of, and I mentioned the coronavirus and the lockdowns and how a lot of us in our agencies had to learn to adapt from working from home, for example, and now that the lockdowns have gone away, we've sort of learned process improvement and still do a little bit of those things. Obviously not a comparison, but I'm just wondering, are there key lessons or experiences that you've had as far as continuing to develop a probation service against the backdrop of a war?
Yeah, we have key lessons for sure.
I can imagine.
The most important thing for us is the protection of personal data and the ability to work with the register, the ability to work in an electronic format. And we understand that it's much safer in conditions of unexpected occupations. Just like disconnected and saved, and there is no need to spend some resources on transportation, their destruction. We also learned that there must be a mobile connection. The possibility of mobile connection with clients. This is also experience of personal communication, which is undoubtedly important in the process of individual work with the probation client, and in the conditions of war, even just contacting for us is a significant achievement. Just maintaining contact in order to understand where a person is. Also, the process of serving sentences shouldn't be separate from the state policy. That is, now the clients themselves are involved in the restoration of the territories. In the de-occupied territories, facilities for the implementation of community service are appearing. We actually try to encourage and give the opportunity for clients to participate in the life of the state and the community during the war. Now we need to quickly adapt at the level of normative acts. That is, not to single out the process of carrying out criminal punishment as a task that we need to solve. But now we have some different category of clients that are actually against the foundations of national security. And we note that we have clients who don't have a criminalized lifestyle and criminal contamination, such as those convicted of property or violent crimes. This is a special category that has false consciousness, values, and this is really a new experience for us, because we mainly worked on changing antisocial lifestyles, pro-criminal thinking from the point of view of material status or violence. And these are ideological criminals. This is just different area. At first, we thought that maybe we need to create a separate program for them, a separate risk assessment. And when we started to do this, we came to the conclusion through different discussions and practices, and that is possible. We understand that it's possible to use the existing assessment to assess the risk of committing a repeated offense, the risk of danger to society. And the probation program cannot be separate because our probation programs are aimed at overcoming pro-criminal thinking.
How do you envision the future of probation development in Ukraine, considering, of course, the ongoing war and its impact on your criminal justice system?
In one word, it's difficult to say. The test of war, in principle, showed the viability of probation as a system in the state. That is, our system didn't stop. It adapted to work in the condition of restrictions imposed by the war. It's even shown the stability of relations between today's probation officers and clients. But as for the future development of our probation, is something that the war prevented us from. Before the war, we created model probation offices, and we wanted to spread this experience throughout Ukraine. It's not just like building; it's a kind of a tool that has all the necessary things to ensure the safety of personnel, safety of personal data, feeling of comfort and privacy of individual work with client. We strive to make modern offices that will help the efficient work of probation. And we plan to significantly change the organization of free work in the community, namely to expand the list of facilities where it can take place. We want to be able to gather groups of such people, which will be very useful in the process of post-war reconstruction of the territories of Ukraine. And we plan to introduce legislative electronic control over the place of stay. So we'd like to implement the mobile application, electronic probation.
Very, very exciting. Can you share any success stories or positive outcomes achieved by the probation system in Ukraine, despite the challenges posed by the war?
Yes, there are so many bright examples. When we're talking about probation officers, they maintain contact with the probation clients, carry out supervision measures, work with documents. But also, our probation officers try to be useful, try to help people, try to help the armed forces of Ukraine, do whatever can be useful for everyone citizen in Ukraine. Also, before the war, we talk about how many probation officers contribute to increase security in communities by correcting offenders and preventing them from committing new crimes. Now, more and more often, we tell about real stories of how employees and clients of probation help in ensuring security in their cities and villages, as well as in Ukraine as a whole.
Just incredible work being done over there, Margarita. What are some resources or support that would be beneficial for the future development and improvement of the Ukrainian probation services?
Of course, in the conditions of war, a significant challenge is the limitation of state resources, which can be directed to recovery of losses and further development of probation. Probation of Ukraine today needs support in restoring lost workplaces and offices, some technical support for the work of personnel, taking into account the need for their mobility. And of course, we desperately need the development and introduction of technical and educational innovations, experience in using special software products, in working with probation clients, improvement of existing probation tools, and of course, learning the experience of new ones.
Margarita, so proud of the work you're doing over there. Let me know personally or through my network of connections around the planet in the world of corrections, anything that might be useful for you or your agencies over there in developing and continuing to improve those probation services despite the horrific backdrop of war, which you and your colleagues and family are having to endure. Margarita, thank you so much for connecting with us. I know it took a little bit. I'm so satisfied we stuck with it and got this interview in. What a great connection. And again, God bless you and everything you're doing over there. And please keep in touch with the program. And I hope we can do some work moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you for this opportunity to talk with you and share our experience. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Margarita. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
A sincere thank you to Margarita Potseluiko for joining us all the way from Kiev in her home country of Ukraine. What an incredible profile in courage. I was struck by some of the common denominators that you also may have picked up during the interview. Talking about probation in a time of war, yet still hearing themes around the importance of maintaining contact with your probation officer. Or more to the point, the importance rather of that element of trust in that relationship. These universal themes that we hear all around the planet. Even things like risk assessment and the importance of addressing pro-criminal thinking are still going on against the horrors of war in Ukraine. So it's just another example of how these core correctional skills and these approaches that we take really are universal around the globe. I am leaving a link for the American Probation and Parole Association's registration for their upcoming Fall Training Institute this August of 2023 in New York City. We are going to be staying at the Marriott Marquis right on Broadway. You're not going to want to miss this great opportunity to up your level of skill and make some fantastic connections. I will be in New York, among other things. I will be speaking with my dear friend and mentor, Iwan Dernescu, on Sunday during one of their intensive sessions. Professor Dernescu is flying in from Bucharest. We are going to be talking all about core correctional skills. Please, if you're in New York City for the APPA conference, swing by Sunday afternoon and say hello. Of course, plenty going on at APPA this year besides those intensive sessions on Sunday afternoon. If you attend in person, you will have access to over 80 accredited workshops touching on all aspects of pretrial, probation, and parole work. There will, of course, be all sorts of networking opportunities meant to build long-term partnerships, which you will benefit from throughout your career. I can assure you of that. And of course, you'll have full access to the exposition hall where the vendors come in and show you the latest and greatest that they have to make our jobs easier in the field of probation and parole. Now, if you can't make it to New York in person, I really want to encourage you to check out the virtual option. You can register for this conference virtually and experience real-time engagement with APPA's plenary and special sessions, which will be live streamed from New York City. You'll also get early, on-demand access to over a dozen unique accredited workshop recordings. Also, on-demand access to a bonus selection of previously released webinar recordings. And of course, the ability to connect with other virtual attendees. Check out the links in the episode of this podcast for lots of information regarding this incredible learning event coming up this August in New York City. The Criminologist podcast will be back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, program design, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New, fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this program. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us, ask them to subscribe to the podcast, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
Some of the probation officers remain in the occupied territory to this day, and we unfortunately don't know anything about them at all. There are 6 of them.
This has been a special APPA edition of the Criminologist podcast. Their international relations team looks forward to sharing the insights of other subject matter experts from around the world in future episodes. The Criminologist podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.